The man at the corner of the bar didn't order a drink. He didn't need to. Bellamy Cross had already placed a glass of Macallan 18, neat, no ice, in front of him before he opened his mouth. 4 weeks ago, he had sat in this exact seat, ordered this exact drink, at exactly 9:47 in the evening. He didn't speak to anyone for 40 minutes, and when he left, he tipped $200, 3 times more than any other guest that night. Bellamy remembered all of it. She remembered everyone who ever walked through that door. The Gilded Room was no ordinary bar. This was where the most powerful people in Manhattan came to drink and say things they believed no one would remember. Politicians, lawyers, businessmen, and the kind of people whose names never made the papers. But everyone knew better than to stand in their way. They came here because of one unspoken rule. What's said at the Gilded Room dies at the Gilded Room. But they forgot one thing. Bellamy Cross had never forgotten anything in her life. Not because she chose to remember, because she couldn't forget. Every face, every drink, every half-finished sentence someone let slip after too much whiskey. All of it locked inside her mind. Vivid, sharp, never fading. The man looked at the glass, then at her. "How did you know what I drink? You came here for the first time when the cold outside was just beginning to fade. 9:47 in the evening. Macallan 18, neat. You sat alone, didn't talk to anyone, and left after 40 minutes. He didn't respond, just looked at her long enough for Bellamy to understand. This man was not used to being remembered. She didn't know he was Beckett Aldridge, the boss of the oldest Mafia family on the East Coast. She also didn't know that 2 weeks from tonight, a man would be found dead right outside this bar. And she, the bartender who remembered everything, would become the one person everyone was looking for. The police wanted her to testify. The Mafia boss wanted her silence, and the killer wanted her gone, permanently, all because she remembered. And the thing she remembered most clearly was exactly who left the bar 3 minutes before the gunshot. If this story touched your heart, hit that like button to help us keep telling stories like this. And if you haven't subscribed yet, subscribe now, so you never miss what comes next. And this is where the story truly begins. Beckett took a sip, slowly, without haste, as if he had the entire night, and the entire night belonged to him. Bellamy returned to the bar and kept working. The room was still crowded. Laughter, glasses touching, someone telling a story too loudly after the third drink. She made a gin tonic for the lawyer sitting at the end of the bar, poured more bourbon for a real estate businessman whose face she recognized. Her hands worked, but her ears listened. Always listened. At the table near the back of the room, 2 men sat across from each other. She knew the first one, Knox Aldridge, Beckett's half-brother, the underboss of the Aldridge organization. Knox came to the Gilded Room often, always ordered Macallan like Beckett, always sat in the private section. But tonight Knox was drinking more than usual. And the man sitting with him, a middle-aged man in a gray suit Bellamy had never seen before, was clearly from the financial world. The way he glanced around the room before lowering his voice said everything. Bellamy walked toward the table area to collect the glasses. A perfectly ordinary reason. No one looked twice at a bartender clearing glasses. The advisor leaned toward Knox, his voice low, but not low enough. Haverford, the warehouse by the harbor. Sterling Atlas receives the shipment next Thursday, 2 o'clock in the morning. Sterling Atlas, Haverford, Thursday, 2 o'clock in the morning. 3 pieces of information. Bellamy didn't need to repeat them in her head. They were already there, permanently. Knox glanced up and saw her holding the tray of glasses. He tilted his head, signaling for her to leave. Bellamy gave a slight nod and returned to the bar. Natural. Normal. Like every other night. The room slowly emptied after midnight. Margot Steele, the manager, stood at the door saying goodbye to the departing guests. The staff cleared tables and stacked chairs. At 12:45, the place was empty. But Beckett Aldridge was still sitting there. His second glass of Macallan, still 1/3 full. He wasn't looking at his phone, wasn't talking, only sitting there and watching Bellamy. She picked up a towel and walked over to him. "We're closed, Mr. Aldridge." "I know." Beckett set the glass down, turned on the bar stool, and faced her fully. "Tonight, you stood near my brother's table for quite a while. I was clearing glasses. That's my job." "And what did you hear?" Bellamy looked straight at him. She could lie. Say, "I didn't hear anything," and tonight would end here. But lying to this man was like digging her own grave. He would check, and he would know. "I heard enough," Beckett's expression didn't change. Then forget it. I can't forget. Anyone can forget, if they want to. Not me. Bellamy set the towel down on the bar. You came here for the first time when winter was just beginning to soften. 9:47 in the evening. McAllen 18. Neat. 40 minutes. Didn't speak to anyone. $200 in tips. You wore a black shirt. No tie. You're right-handed, but you held your glass with your left hand. She stopped. I'm not dangerous, Mr. Aldridge. I just remember, whether that's dangerous or not depends on what the person standing in front of me has to hide. Beckett looked at her longer than he had the first time. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't curiosity either. It was the look of a man who had just discovered there was one more piece on the board than he'd thought. He stood, buttoned his suit jacket, placed a $100 bill on the bar. You have a good memory. Good for you. His voice was calm. But there are things you can remember that doesn't mean you should remember. Sterling Atlas. Haverford. You've never heard those names. Bellamy didn't answer. Beckett walked toward the door. Margot was standing there, keys in hand. Beckett stopped beside her and spoke loudly enough to be heard. If she speaks to anyone strange in the next 2 weeks, I want to know. Then he left. The door of the gilded room closed behind him. Margot turned to Bellamy. Do you know what you just did? Bellamy kept wiping the bar. I answered a question. You just provoked Beckett Aldridge, the Aldridge boss. Do you understand who he is? I understand. Then why didn't you say, I didn't hear anything, and let him leave? Bellamy stopped moving. Because I can't lie. And because he'd know I was lying. People like that, Margot, they're not afraid of someone who knows too much. They're afraid of someone who knows too much and pretends they know nothing. Margot sighed. One day that head of yours is going to get you in trouble. It's been getting me in trouble my whole life, but I'm still alive. She turned off the bar lights. The gilded room sank into darkness, and inside Bellamy's mind, the 3 names still burned bright. Sterling Atlas. Haverford. Thursday, 2 o'clock in the morning. She didn't know whether those 3 names would save her life or push her toward death, but she knew one thing for certain. She wouldn't forget them. 2 weeks passed, and nothing happened. Bellamy went to work, came home to Jonah, cooked, told bedtime stories, then returned to the gilded room when the sky went dark. Beckett Aldridge didn't appear, but every night, when Bellamy stepped out of the bar, she noticed a black sedan parked half a block away, always in the same place, always with its lights off. She didn't say anything, she only remembered. Then Friday night came. The gilded room was more crowded than usual, a private party for the financial crowd, with a few politicians stopping by after a fundraiser in Midtown. Margot had to call in 2 more servers. Bellamy stood behind the bar from 7 o'clock in the evening, mixing drinks without stopping. Hugo Trent sat at the table near the window, a politician, 55 years old, a regular at the gilded room from before Bellamy had started working there. He always ordered Woodford Reserve bourbon, always sat in the same spot, always left before 11 o'clock. Bellamy knew his habits as clearly as she knew the palm of her own hand. Knox Aldridge was there too. He sat on the opposite side of the room, 4 tables away from Hugo Trent. But tonight, something was different about Knox. Bellamy didn't need to think to recognize it. She only needed to look. Knox's routine was off. Not by much, only a few small details most people would overlook. But Bellamy wasn't most people. She noted every irregularity, placed them in a corner of her mind, and kept mixing drinks. 10:30. The bar was still loud. Hugo Trent was laughing and talking with the 2 men at his table. Knox sat silently, turning his glass of liquor. Bellamy wiped the bar, her eyes sweeping the room by habit. 10:47. Knox did one thing Bellamy locked away immediately. She didn't analyze it. Not yet. She only recorded it. Exactly 11 o'clock. Knox stood, left cash on the table, and walked toward the door. Bellamy watched him go. The wall clock behind the bar showed exactly 11 o'clock. She remembered. 3 minutes later, Hugo Trent stood as well. He shook hands with his 2 friends, put on his coat, and walked toward the front door. Bellamy watched him push open the glass door and step onto the stone threshold. Then the gunshot. A single sound. Dry, clean, echoing through the Manhattan night air before going dead. Hugo Trent collapsed right in front of the steps of the gilded room. Inside the bar, everything shattered. Someone screamed. A glass fell and broke on the floor. People shoved toward the back, away from the front door. Margot shouted for the staff to lock the side door. A woman cried. A man called 911 in a trembling voice. Bellamy stood behind the bar. She didn't run. She didn't scream. She closed her eyes. 3 seconds. In those 3 seconds, everything she had seen that night arranged itself into a line. Who sat where? Who left their table and when? Who spoke to whom? Who paid with what? Who changed their habit? Who took a phone call? Who walked out before Hugo Trent? And how long before him? 3 seconds. Enough to lock everything in place. She opened her eyes. The bar was still chaos, but inside Bellamy's mind, everything was clear and still, like a photograph. The police arrived within 15 minutes. Patrol cars, an ambulance, red and blue lights flashing through the glass doors of the gilded room. They sealed off the area, took statements from every employee, every guest who had stayed behind. Detective Perry Walsh was in charge. He was tall, with salt and pepper hair, wearing a wrinkled coat as if he had just been dragged out of bed. He spoke to Margot first, then to each server. Finally, he came to Bellamy. He sat across from her in a corner of the bar and opened his notebook. Your name? Bellamy Cross. What were you doing at the time of the incident? Mixing drinks. Behind the bar. The bar faces the entrance? Yes. So you could see the front door all night. I was working. I mixed drinks, wiped glasses, served customers. Perry looked at her. He didn't write anything else in his notebook. He only looked. The kind of look from a man who had conducted enough interrogations to know when someone was saying less than they knew. You didn't see anything unusual? Didn't see anyone leave the bar? Didn't hear anyone say anything? The place was crowded. I was focused on my work. Perry closed his notebook. Slowly. Then he pulled a business card from his coat pocket, placed it on the bar, and pushed it toward Bellamy. When you remember something, call me. He stood and left. Bellamy looked at the business card. Perry Walsh, detective, New York Police Department, phone number, email. She remembered every character on that card instantly, without needing to pick it up. She remembered everything. She always remembered. But she also remembered exactly what had happened the last time she believed telling the truth to the police would change anything. She remembered it as clearly as she remembered every line in her mother's case file. So she didn't call. She slipped the business card into the pocket of her apron, turned off the bar lights, and went home. Outside the gilded room, the police lights were still flashing. Hugo Trent had been taken away. The sidewalk in front of the bar had been taped off. But Manhattan didn't stop, because one man had fallen. This city had never stopped for anyone, and inside Bellamy's mind, every detail of that night lay still, sharp, waiting. She didn't yet know when she would use them, but she knew this. One day, someone would need what she remembered. The question was whether that person wanted the truth, or wanted her to disappear with it. 2 days after the Hugo Trent incident, the gilded room was still closed by police order. The tape blocking off the front steps had been removed, but the white chalk mark on the sidewalk was still there. Bellamy came to the bar at 9 o'clock at night to check the inventory, clean up, and prepare for the day it would reopen. She worked alone. Margot had given the staff leave until the weekend. She was rearranging the bottles of liquor on the shelf when she heard a knock at the back door. 2 knocks, slow and even. She knew it wasn't Margot, because Margot had a key. She looked through the small security camera mounted above the door. Beckett Aldridge stood outside in the alley, alone, without a bodyguard. She opened the door. Beckett stepped inside without waiting to be invited. He looked around the bar, a quick sweep that still missed nothing, then sat down in his usual place, at the corner of the bar. The bar isn't open. I didn't come for a drink. Bellamy stood behind the bar, keeping her distance. Then what did you come for? Beckett looked at her. You know why. Hugo Trent went down right outside this door. The police took your statement, and I know you didn't tell them everything you know. I told them enough. You didn't tell them enough. Those are 2 different things. Beckett leaned slightly forward. Bellamy, what you know could put you in danger. Not from the police. From the people who don't want the police to know. Let me keep you safe. Bellamy looked at him. Her voice was calm. I don't know whether you want to keep me safe or keep me quiet, and I don't think I can tell the difference. Beckett didn't get angry. He only gave a slight nod, as if she had answered exactly the way he'd expected. I'll ask again. When you realize you have no other choice. He stood, walked out through the back door, and disappeared into the dark alley. Bellamy locked the door and went back to arranging the bottles. Her hands didn't shake. But for the first time since the night Hugo Trent collapsed, she felt the darkness inside the bar growing heavier than usual. 3 more days passed. The gilded room reopened. Fewer guests came, they spoke more softly, and they looked toward the door more often. The steps where Hugo Trent had fallen had been washed clean, but people still walked past that place faster than usual. Bellamy mixed drinks, served customers, wiped glasses, remembered everything. Like every other night, Wednesday. Bellamy finished her shift at 1 o'clock in the morning. She walked 4 blocks to the subway station, took the A train back to Brooklyn, and climbed the stairs out of the station at 1:45. Her apartment was on the 3rd floor, at the end of the hallway, behind a dark blue door with 2 locks. She turned into the hallway and stopped. In front of her apartment door, on the doormat, there was a cocktail. A crystal glass. Not a plastic cup. Not an ordinary bar glass. Inside was a Negroni, Campari, gin, red vermouth, and a twisted orange peel resting on the rim of the glass. Exactly the drink Bellamy had whenever she treated herself after a long week. Beside the glass was a white piece of paper. No words. Just blank, white paper. Bellamy stood still. She looked at the cocktail, looked at the paper, looked at the empty hallway. There was no security camera on this floor, and she knew because she had checked from the first day she moved in. Someone had stood right in front of her door, knew where she lived, knew what she drank, and wanted her to know it. She didn't panic. She didn't call the police. She bent down and studied the Negroni carefully. A Waterford crystal glass, Lismore line, thin rim, genuine Campari. The red exactly the right shade. Not cheap liquor. The orange peel had been twisted with a proper bar knife. The cut clean, without frayed edges. Whoever made this drink knew how to mix a cocktail, or had hired someone who did. She picked up the glass, opened the door, and stepped inside. She went straight to the kitchen, poured the Negroni down the sink. The liquor ran away, leaving the orange peel on the drain strainer. She placed the crystal glass upside down on the kitchen counter. She didn't keep it as evidence. She didn't need physical evidence. Every detail was already inside her head, clearer than any photograph. Bellamy looked toward the small bedroom at the end of the hallway. The door was slightly open, and the spaceship nightlight cast a faint orange glow. Jonah was asleep, curled up, hugging the teddy bear with one worn ear. 6 years old, knew nothing, shouldn't know anything. She took out her phone and called Margot. "What time is it that you're calling?" Margot's voice was thick with sleep. "I need to send Jonah to your place, right now." Margot was silent for 1 second. "What happened?" "I have to go on a work trip for a few days. Keep Jonah for me." Margot knew work trip wasn't a work trip, but she also knew she shouldn't ask more over the phone. "Bring him over." Bellamy woke Jonah. The little boy rubbed his eyes, yawned, and hugged his teddy bear. "Auntie, why are we waking up so early?" "You're going to stay with Aunt Margot for a few days, okay? I have to go on a work trip." Jonah looked at her, his eyes still hazy. "Does Aunt Margot have ice cream?" "She does. 2 tubs." "Then okay." Bellamy changed Jonah's clothes, packed his small backpack, and called a car. While they waited for it to arrive, Jonah stood at the door, hugging Bellamy. "Auntie, will you forget me?" Bellamy smiled. Her eyes were wet, but her voice was steady. "You know me. I can't forget anyone, especially you." "Then do you remember what you promised?" "I promised I'd always come home." "Then remember to keep your promise." Bellamy kissed the boy's forehead. "I remember. I always remember." The car arrived. Jonah climbed in, waved, and smiled. The door closed. The car drove away. Bellamy stood on the Brooklyn sidewalk at 2 o'clock in the morning, watching the taillights grow smaller, then turn at the corner and disappear. She stood there for another 10 seconds. Then she took out her phone and scrolled through her contacts. She stopped at a number with no name, only 10 digits. That number had appeared on the $100 bill Beckett left on the bar the first night. He had written it with a ballpoint pen on the back of the bill, small letters leaning to the right. Bellamy remembered every stroke. She pressed call. 2 rings. Beckett picked up. He didn't say hello. Didn't ask who was calling. Only silence, waiting. "Someone knows where I live." Bellamy's voice was calm. "I need to talk." 3 seconds of silence on the other end of the line. Then Beckett said, clipped, and without asking anything else, "I'll send a car. 15 minutes." He hung up. Bellamy put the phone in her pocket. She turned back to look at the third-floor apartment, where Jonah's spaceship nightlight still glowed through the window. She would come back. She had promised. But first, she had to make sure that when she came back, no one would be standing in front of her door with a Negroni and a blank white piece of paper again. The afternoon after that, Bellamy came to the Gilded Room earlier than usual. She wanted to check the liquor storage again before opening time. The bar was empty, the lights dim, with only the steady hum of the air conditioner running through the silence. She was counting the bourbon bottles on the shelf when the bell at the front door rang. Margot hadn't arrived yet. Bellamy looked through the glass door. Perry Walsh stood outside, holding a paper cup of coffee, his eyes fixed straight on the security camera, as if he knew she was watching. She opened the door. "The bar isn't open yet, Detective. I didn't come for a drink." Perry stepped inside without waiting to be invited. He looked around the empty bar, pulled out a chair, and sat down at the counter. "You know why I'm here. You want me to testify. I want you to tell the truth. There's a difference." Perry set the coffee cup down. Hugo Trent was a federal politician. This isn't a street robbery. You stood behind the bar all night, facing the entrance. You saw who came in and who went out, who sat where, who left before it happened. You know, Bellamy, and I need you to speak. Bellamy wiped her hands on a towel, slowly. "You think my testimony will change anything? It could put the person who did it in prison, or it could be thrown into a drawer and no one would ever look at it a second time." Perry frowned. "What do you mean by that?" Bellamy looked at him. She was silent for a moment, as if weighing whether to open this door or not. Then she spoke, her voice flat, not telling a story, only stating the truth, as if reading from a page. "My mother died when I was 14, a robbery at a pawn shop on Flatbush. I wasn't there. I was home, waiting for her to come back, and she never came back." She paused. "Years later, I got the case file. I read every page, and because my mind works the way it works, every one of those pages printed itself in here." She pointed to her temple. "It doesn't fade. It doesn't blur. I remember the name of the man who did it. I remember his face from the photograph in the file. I even remember the name of the officer who signed the order to close the case because the killer had someone connected higher up." Perry said nothing. "So don't talk to me about duty, Detective Walsh. I know the value of testimony, and I know who your system protects." She looked straight at him. "I'll testify, but only when I'm sure my statement won't be thrown away again. Give me time." Perry looked at her for a long while. Then he stood, picked up his coffee cup, and gave a short nod. "I'm not that kind of cop, Bellamy, but I understand why you think I am." He walked toward the door, stopped, and spoke with his back to her. "You have my number. Don't wait too long." The door closed. Bellamy stood alone behind the bar, the towel still in her hand. She didn't know what kind of cop Perry Walsh was, but she knew she had spoken about her mother to a stranger for the first time in 13 years, and that made her chest feel heavier than any bottle of liquor she had ever lifted. That night, the bar was moderately crowded. Bellamy mixed drinks until 12:30. Margot left early. The servers finished cleaning and left at 1 o'clock. Bellamy stayed behind to check the locks, turn off the lights, lock the front door, then went out through the back door into the alley behind the bar. The alley was narrow, dark, lit only by the pale yellow glow of a bulb mounted above the emergency exit of the building next door. Bellamy walked quickly, her purse across her body, her keys already held in her hand. She walked through this alley every night. She knew every crack in the brick wall, every trash bin, every place where water collected. But tonight, there was something she had never seen before. A black SUV parked at the end of the alley, its lights off, its rear door already open. She stopped walking. Instinct told her to turn back. But before she could turn, two shadows separated from the darkness on both sides of the wall. One man stepped out and blocked her path. The second stood behind her. "Get in the car." The voice of the man in front was low, not shouting. Bellamy took one step back. The man behind her grabbed her arm and shoved her toward the vehicle. Her back hit the brick wall, her elbow scraping against the rough surface. She jerked her arm away, but the man gripped her tighter and pushed her 2 more steps toward the open car door. Bellamy didn't scream. She knew no one would hear her in this alley at 1 o'clock in the morning. With her other hand, she shoved at the chest of the man in front of her, trying to create distance. Her purse fell to the ground. Then a voice rose from the mouth of the alley. Calm, not shouting, as if speaking in a living room. You two have 10 seconds. Everything stopped. The man holding Bellamy's arm loosened his grip. The man in front turned to look toward the mouth of the alley. Beckett Aldridge stood there, alone, empty-handed, unarmed. He wore a dark shirt and a long coat, standing straight, calm, as if he were waiting for a taxi, not watching two men force a woman into a car. 3 figures stood behind him, but Beckett stood in front, 2 steps ahead of them. The 2 men in the alley looked at each other. Then they looked back at Beckett. And Bellamy saw clearly the moment they realized who he was. Not because Beckett said anything else, but because their faces changed. Anger turned into hesitation. Hesitation turned into fear. They let go of Bellamy, stepped back 2 paces, then turned and ran toward the SUV. The car door slammed shut. The engine roared. The SUV backed out of the alley and disappeared. Bellamy stood leaning against the brick wall. The shoulder of her shirt was torn. Her right elbow was scraped, red beginning to rise through the skin. Her purse lay on the ground. She was breathing fast, but she wasn't panicking. Her eyes stayed fixed on Beckett. He walked toward her. Slowly. He didn't run, didn't hurry, as if everything was still under control. He stopped 1 step away from her, looked at her scraped elbow, looked at the torn shoulder of her shirt. Then he took off his coat and gently placed it over her shoulders, careful not to touch the scrape. "Come." 1 word. He didn't ask if she was all right. He didn't ask if she wanted to call the police. He didn't explain why he was here, why he knew, why he had arrived at exactly the right moment. Just 1 word. Bellamy picked up her purse. She looked at Beckett, looked at the 3 men standing motionless at the mouth of the alley, looked at the dark alley she walked through every night and would never see the same way again. Then she followed Beckett. For the first time in her life, she let someone lead her away without asking where they were going. And strangely, what she remembered most clearly in that moment wasn't the 2 men in the darkness, wasn't the roar of the SUV, wasn't the scrape burning on her elbow. It was the way Beckett placed his coat over her shoulders, carefully, gently, as if she were something that could break, and he didn't want to be the one who broke her. The safe apartment was on the 12th floor of a building in Midtown, with no name on the doorbell, no mailbox, and no neighbors on either side. Beckett took Bellamy there right after the dark alley. He opened the door with a keycard, turned on the lights, and showed her the bedroom, the bathroom, the kitchen. The refrigerator had food in it. An internal phone mounted on the wall connected straight to the security desk on the ground floor. No one knew this address except Beckett and his 3 men. "You'll stay here until I've handled this," Beckett said, then left. He didn't ask whether she agreed. There was no need to ask. They both knew she had no other choice. That first night, Bellamy didn't sleep. She sat on the sofa in the living room, the table lamp casting a warm yellow light, with a blank notebook she had found in a drawer open in front of her. She didn't need a notebook to remember. She needed it to organize. Because her mind was like a room packed full of files. Everything was there, but not always in the right order. Writing it down helped her pull each piece into the light, set them beside one another, and see the shape they made. She wrote the title, Friday Night, The Gilded Room, Hugo Trent. Then, she began. Knox Aldridge ordered an old-fashioned. For the first time since Bellamy had worked at the Gilded Room, Knox didn't order Macallan. Dozens of visits to the bar, and Knox had never once changed his order. But that night, he changed. An old-fashioned. The kind of drink people ordered when they needed something familiar to hold on to, when their hands needed to stay busy with the orange peel and the ice cube, when their mind was somewhere else. 10:47. Knox received a call. He looked at the screen, didn't answer right away, looked around the room first, then stood and walked into the hallway area behind the bar. 2 minutes later, he came back. His face hadn't changed, but he didn't drink again. Knox paid. Cash. Usually Knox always used a black card. Always. Without exception. But that night, he left several bills on the table. Didn't wait for the check. Didn't wait for change. Exactly 11 o'clock. Knox stood, put on his coat, and walked out through the front door. Bellamy looked at the wall clock. 11 o'clock. Exactly. 11:03. Hugo Trent stepped out the door, and the gunshot rang out. 3 minutes. Knox left the bar 3 minutes before Hugo. Enough time to go outside, meet someone, confirm that Hugo was sitting in the right place, at the right time, beside the window where anyone standing on the sidewalk could see him clearly. Then disappear. Bellamy closed the notebook. She looked at the clock on the wall of the safe apartment. 3:12 in the morning. She took out her phone and called Beckett. He answered after one ring. His voice was awake, not thick with sleep, as if he hadn't slept either. "I know who's behind this," Bellamy said. "You need to come here." Silence for 2 seconds. It was the first time she had called him you in a familiar way instead of speaking to him formally. She hadn't meant to. It had slipped out naturally, as if after the night in the alley, after the coat placed over her shoulders, the distance between them had shortened, though neither of them had named it. Beckett arrived in 20 minutes. He sat across from her on the sofa, looking at the open notebook on the table. Bellamy didn't hand him the notebook. She led him through every detail with her voice. With data, no guesses, no assumptions, only what she had seen, heard, and remembered. Knox changed his order. Knox received a call at 10:47. Knox paid cash. Knox left the bar at 11 o'clock. Hugo went out the door at 11:03, 3 minutes. When she finished speaking, Beckett didn't react right away. His face didn't change, but Bellamy saw his hand on the arm of the sofa slowly tighten, his knuckles turning white. "Knox is my brother," he said, his voice low. "I know. You know, and you're still saying this? Do you want me to lie?" Beckett looked at her. For a long time. Then he said, softer now, more tired, "No, I want you to tell the truth. That's why I'm sitting here." He stood and walked toward the door. Before leaving, he turned back. "Don't tell this to anyone else. Not yet." Bellamy nodded. The door closed. She sat alone with the blank notebook and the timeline of a night she wished she could forget. A few nights later, 3 o'clock in the morning, Bellamy woke, sweat soaking her pillow, her breath coming fast. It wasn't a nightmare. It was worse than a nightmare. It was memory. Clear, sharp, unfaded, no different from the first time it had been printed into her mind. She sat up suddenly, both hands gripping the edge of the bed, breathing until the tightness in her chest eased. In the living room, there was a faint sound. Footsteps. Then a knock at the bedroom door. 2 knocks. Slow. Even. She opened the door. Beckett stood in the hallway, still wearing his coat, his car keys in his hand. He had stopped by late to check the security and hadn't left yet. He looked at her. Red eyes, hands trembling slightly, hair disheveled, sweat on her forehead. He didn't ask whether she was all right, didn't ask what she had dreamed about. He only stepped into the living room, sat down in the chair across from her, and stayed silent. Bellamy sat down on the sofa. The two of them sat in the yellow light of the safe apartment at 3 o'clock in the morning, saying nothing. 1 minute, 2 minutes, until Bellamy spoke on her own, because Beckett's silence gave her room to speak instead of pressure to speak. "I remember everything, even the things I want most to forget." Silence. Some nights, it comes back so clearly that I can't tell whether I'm dreaming or awake, and when I open my eyes, I know I'm awake. But the memory is still there, exactly the same. It hasn't faded, not even a little. Beckett looked at her, then he spoke, and his voice wasn't the voice of the Aldridge boss, wasn't the voice of a man giving orders or taking control. It was only the voice of a man sitting before a woman who was in pain. "Then you're stronger than anyone I've ever met, because you carry all of that, every day, and you're still standing." Bellamy looked at him, and for the first time, she felt that her memory wasn't only a curse, because someone had looked at the thing she had always seen as a burden and called it strength. He didn't tell her to forget, didn't say time would heal it. He only said she was strong because she was still standing. Beckett stayed a little longer. Then he stood, walked to the door, quietly, without saying anything more. The door closed. Bellamy sat alone in the living room, but the room no longer felt as cold as it had on the nights before. Knox Aldridge wasn't the kind of man who used fists when he could use his mind. He knew Bellamy was under Beckett's protection. He knew he couldn't touch her a second time without starting a direct war with his younger brother. So he changed the game. Not force. Strategy. On Tuesday morning, Bellamy received a call from an unknown number. The person on the other end introduced himself as a representative from the federal prosecutor's office, handling the Hugo Trent case. He said he wanted to meet Bellamy to discuss the witness protection program. Not at the police station, not at the courthouse. At a coffee shop, unofficially, so she could feel more comfortable. Bellamy listened, took note, and agreed. Not because she believed him, because she wanted to know who was looking for her and how. The coffee shop was 3 blocks from the safe apartment. Bellamy arrived 10 minutes early, chose a corner table, her back against the wall, her face turned toward the door. An old habit. She ordered a black coffee and waited. The man arrived right on time. 35 to 40 years old, neatly combed hair, dark blue suit, leather briefcase, polished shoes. He looked exactly like a lawyer. He sat down, opened the briefcase, took out a stack of papers, and placed a recording pen on the table. Professional. Proper procedure. Bellamy observed. "Thank you for coming, Miss Cross. I'll ask a few brief questions. You may answer or not, completely voluntarily." Bellamy nodded. The first question. "Were you present at the Gilded Room on the night Hugo Trent was shot?" "Yes. I work as a bartender. I was behind the bar from 7 o'clock in the evening." Reasonable. An open question, confirming her presence. The right way for a prosecutor to begin. The second question. "Did you see anyone leave the bar before the gunshot rang out?" "Many people left the bar throughout the evening. I wasn't specifically watching anyone." Also reasonable. A narrower question, focused on timing. Bellamy answered just enough. No more. The third question. "Do you know whether Beckett Aldridge directly runs any operations within the organization?" Bellamy stopped. Her hand was holding the coffee cup. She set it down. Slowly, not because she didn't know how to answer. Because the question was wrong. The first 2 questions had been about the Hugo Trent case. Correct. A prosecutor investigating Hugo's shooting would ask about that night, about witnesses, about who was there, who left. But the third question was about Beckett, not about the night Hugo was shot. About Beckett. About the organization. About operational control. This wasn't the question of someone searching for a killer. This was the question of someone trying to bring Beckett down. And then Bellamy looked down. The man's right hand rested on the table beside the recording pen. He wore a watch on his wrist. A Breitling, dark blue face, brown leather strap, and at the 2 o'clock position on the clasp, there was a small, deep scratch, about 1/2 centimeter long. Bellamy remembered that watch. 11 days earlier, table number 4, the Gilded Room, on the wrist of a man sitting with Knox Aldridge. That man drank gin, didn't talk much. But when Knox stood up, he stood too. Bodyguard. One of Knox's men. 11 days. Table number 4. Blue-faced Breitling. Scratch at the 2 o'clock position on the clasp. The same watch. On another man's wrist. Bellamy stood. "This meeting ends here." The man looked up, his surprise rehearsed in advance. "Miss Cross, we've only just—" "You're not a prosecutor." Bellamy's voice was calm. She didn't shout, didn't tremble. She spoke as if she were talking to a customer who had ordered the wrong drink. "The third question has nothing to do with the Hugo Trent case. You asked about Beckett Aldridge, about the organization, about command. That's the question of someone who wants information to take someone down, not to find justice." She tilted her head slightly, looking down at his wrist. "And the watch you're wearing, Breitling, blue face, brown leather strap, scratch at the 2 o'clock position on the clasp. I saw it 11 days ago, on the wrist of the man sitting with Knox Aldridge, at table number 4 in the Gilded Room. Do you want me to say his name?" The man's face changed. Not quickly, but enough. The confidence drained from his expression like water, leaving behind a pale, bloodless layer. He folded the leather briefcase, gathered the papers, stood, and walked out of the coffee shop without saying another word. Bellamy remained seated. She took a sip of coffee. Her hand didn't shake. Her mind was moving, assembling the pieces. Knox had sent someone to meet her. Knox wanted her to testify about Beckett. Knox was gathering information to use as a weapon. Not against the police, against his own younger brother. But she knew something else, too. Her first 2 answers had been recorded. She had seen the recording pen on the table, and she knew it wasn't an ordinary pen. The kind of pen with a built-in microphone. The kind she had seen in a documentary about criminal investigations. Her voice was clear. Those 2 answers were clear. And in the hands of someone who knew how to cut and splice, they could sound as if she were confessing everything. She left the coffee shop and walked back to the safe apartment. And she knew that in a few hours, or a few days, Beckett would hear that recording. And he would have to decide whom to believe. The woman who remembered everything, whom he had only just begun to trust. or the half-brother he had known his entire life. She didn't know what Beckett would choose. But she knew Knox had just played a very good move, because even when the trap was broken, the card had still been dealt. And that recording, even with only 2 answers, was enough to plant a seed of doubt in anyone's mind, even Beckett Aldridge's. Exactly as she predicted. That evening, Knox's phone sent Beckett a message with an audio file attached. The message was brief. "Your girl is selling you out." Beckett listened to the recording once. Then he listened to it a second time. Bellamy's voice was clear, impossible to mistake. "Yes, I work as a bartender. I was behind the bar from 7 o'clock in the evening." Then the second sentence. "Many people left the bar throughout the evening. I wasn't specifically watching anyone." The recording ended there. Neat. Clean. It sounded like a statement. He sat in the car outside the safe apartment building, looking at his phone screen. Knox's message sat above the audio file. "Your girl is selling you out." Beckett Aldridge was a man who never made decisions while angry. He knew that about himself. He had built the entire Aldridge organization on that principle. But in the few seconds after hearing Bellamy's voice in the recording, he believed it. Not with reason, with something deeper, darker, older. The part of him that had been betrayed enough times to always be ready for the next one. He entered the apartment without knocking. Keycard. Open. Inside, Bellamy was sitting on the sofa, reading a book, her legs tucked up, a cup of tea on the table. She looked up when she heard the door open, and in 1/10 of a second, Bellamy realized everything had changed. She recognized it in his eyes. Not the eyes of the man who had sat across from her at 3 o'clock in the morning and told her she was strong because she remembered. These were different eyes. Cold, flat, assessing. The eyes of the Aldridge boss looking at a suspect. "Who did you talk to?" His voice was level. He didn't shout. He didn't need to shout. The way he stood in the middle of the room, not sitting down, not taking off his coat, said more clearly than any words could. Bellamy set the book down, slowly. "Someone claiming to be a representative from the federal prosecutor's office called me today. He arranged to meet me at a coffee shop nearby. I went." "You went to meet a prosecutor without telling me." "I went because I wanted to know who was looking for me. And I found out he wasn't a prosecutor. He was one of Knox's men." Beckett's expression didn't change. "I have a recording of your voice. You answered questions about the night Hugo Trent was shot. You confirmed you were there. You confirmed you saw people coming and going. I answered 2 questions. Only 2. I didn't answer the third because I realized he was fake. 2 sentences are enough, Bellamy. 2 sentences in the hands of someone who knows how to cut and splice can sound like you're telling them everything." Bellamy stood. Not because she was angry, because she needed him to look at her at eye level. "Do you want to listen to that recording again?" Her voice was calm, exactly the way it had been when she read him Knox's timeline a few nights earlier. With data, not emotion. "The first question, I answered completely. The second question, I answered completely. The third question, I stopped halfway. The recording cuts off after the second question because I didn't answer the third. I stood up and left." She looked straight at him. "If I was betraying you, why would I stop? Why wouldn't I answer everything? Why does the recording only have 2 answers?" Beckett stood still. His eyes were on her, but Bellamy knew he was replaying the recording in his head. Counting. Checking. "Listen again," Bellamy said. "Listen carefully. The second answer ends. Then there's silence. Then the file stops. There's no third answer, because I had already stood up." Beckett took out his phone, pressed play. The recording ran again through the living room of the safe apartment. The first answer. The second answer. Then silence stretching for 2 seconds. Then it ended. No third answer. Bellamy was right. Beckett turned off the phone. He stood there for another 10 seconds, looking down at the floor. Then he did something Bellamy had never seen before. He sat down, not in a chair, on the arm of the sofa, as if his legs had just lost their reason to remain straight, not sitting like a boss, sitting like a man who had nearly shattered the only thing still whole in his hands, and realized it just in time. The silence stretched, longer than any silence that had ever passed between them. Then Beckett spoke. His voice was low. He didn't look at her. He looked down at his own hands. "I'm so used to being betrayed that I forgot what it feels like to trust someone." Bellamy looked at him. She wasn't angry. She should have been angry. Anyone else would have been. But Bellamy remembered everything. and she remembered clearly the look in Beckett's eyes when he said, "Knox is my brother." She remembered the way his hand had tightened on the arm of the sofa when she read him the timeline. She remembered how he had sat in silence at 3 o'clock in the morning when she woke because of a memory. This man hadn't doubted her because he was cruel. He had doubted her because he was afraid. Because every time he had trusted someone in his life, that person had turned away. His father signed authority over to Knox. Knox arranged Hugo's killing, and now Knox had sent a false recording to break the last person Beckett was beginning to trust. Bellamy understood all of that in a few seconds. Because she remembered, and because she knew what it felt like to trust the wrong person too. She sat down in the chair across from him, closer than usual. Her voice was gentle, not the voice of a bartender, not the voice of a witness, only the voice of one person speaking the simplest truth to another. "Then start again. From now." Beckett looked up at her, and Bellamy saw something in his eyes she had never seen there before. Not calculation, not control, not the look of a boss. It looked like gratitude, and behind it, deeper, was something he wasn't ready to name. Maybe he had never named it in his life. But it was there. Bellamy remembered that moment. She would remember it forever. Not because it was beautiful, but because it was the first time someone had doubted her, been wrong, admitted it, and still stayed. Didn't walk away, didn't become the enemy, just stayed, and started again. And it was also the first time Bellamy Cross, the woman who remembered everything but trusted no one, decided that maybe trusting one person wasn't always a mistake. After that night, Beckett said nothing more about the recording. He came to the safe apartment less often, but each time he came, he stayed longer. And Bellamy realized he wasn't coming to check security. He came because he needed a place where he didn't have to be Beckett Aldridge, the boss of the Aldridge family. Just Beckett. A tired man. But before he could deal with anything else, he had to face Knox. The meeting took place in Beckett's private office, on the top floor of a commercial building the Aldridge family owned in Tribeca. A sealed room, no windows looking outside, soundproof. Beckett sat on one side of the desk, Knox on the other. No one else was in the room. Knox arrived 10 minutes early. That told Beckett two things. Knox knew this meeting mattered, and Knox had prepared. "You wanted to talk, so talk." Knox leaned back in his chair, comfortable, as if he were sitting in his own living room. "But I hope you didn't call me here because of some recording from that bartender." "I called you here because of Hugo Trent." Knox raised an eyebrow. "Hugo Trent was shot outside a bar. The police are investigating. What does that have to do with me?" "You know what it has to do with you." Knox was silent for a moment. Then he leaned forward, his voice lowering, shifting into another tone. No longer relaxed. Sharper. "You're listening to a bartender instead of listening to your own brother. Do you know how that sounds?" Beckett looked at Knox. For a long time, calmly, "You're not my full brother. You're my father's son." His voice didn't rise, but every word landed as heavy as stone. "And father chose me to sit in this chair not because I was legitimate, but because he believed I wouldn't turn this family into something he'd regret for the rest of his life." The room went silent. Knox looked at Beckett, and for the first time in the meeting, the smile disappeared from his face. In its place was something older, deeper, anger. Not the anger of a man falsely accused, the anger of a man seen through. Knox stood, buttoned his suit jacket, looked at Beckett one last time, then "Let's see who regrets it first." He walked out of the room. The door closed. Beckett sat alone, both hands resting on the desk, staring at the empty chair across from him. He had just looked into the eyes of the man who carried his father's blood and seen nothing there that still resembled family. 3 days later, Knox made his move. Not directly. Knox never moved directly. He arranged a meeting through an intermediary, inviting Beckett to meet a new transportation partner in an industrial district outside Newark. A large contract, attractive profits, exactly in line with the legalization path Beckett was pursuing. The perfect bait. Beckett went with 2 men. The meeting began normally, but half an hour later, the partner began applying pressure, setting unreasonable conditions, his tone escalating. When Beckett stood to leave, the situation erupted. The partner's men blocked the door. A scuffle broke out. Beckett and his 2 men had to get out through a side door. During the retreat, Beckett slammed into an iron door frame. His left arm hit hard, and his left ribs were badly bruised when he was shoved into the wall. Knox wasn't there. Knox didn't give a direct order. Knox had only arranged for that partner, a man Knox had bought off beforehand, to turn the meeting into a trap. Knox's hands were clean, but Beckett knew, he always knew. 11 o'clock at night. Bellamy was sitting and reading in the safe apartment when she heard the keycard swipe outside the door. She set the book down and stood. Beckett stepped in. His shirt was torn at the left shoulder, the left half of his body leaning slightly, his left hand pressed tight against his ribs. His face was paler than usual. He said nothing, went straight into the kitchen, opened the refrigerator, and took out ice. Bellamy stood in the kitchen doorway, watching him try to open the ice bag with one hand. His right hand trembled slightly. The ice bag slipped from his hand and fell to the floor. Beckett looked at the ice bag at his feet, and Bellamy saw his jaw tighten. Not because of pain, because he was angry at his own weakness. She stepped into the kitchen, picked up the ice bag, and set it on the counter. Then she looked at him. "Sit down. I can handle it myself. You command an entire organization, but you don't let anyone come near you when you're hurt." Bellamy's voice wasn't angry, wasn't accusing. She was only stating the truth. "That isn't strength, Beckett. That's the habit of loneliness." He looked at her. For a long time. Then he sat down on the kitchen chair, slowly, gritting his teeth when his left ribs stabbed with pain. Bellamy took the first aid kit from the bathroom cabinet. She came back, pulled out a chair across from him, and opened the kit. Cotton, bandages, antiseptic. She told him to take off his shirt. Beckett hesitated for 1 second, then obeyed. His left shoulder was bruised purple, his left ribs swollen, the skin faintly red. She cleaned the scrape gently. He didn't move. "Do you know why I don't let anyone get close?" "Why?" "Because the people who get close usually want something." Bellamy set the cotton down and looked at him. "I want you to sit still so I can change the bandage." And Beckett Aldridge laughed. Not the polite laugh he used in meetings. Not the cold smile he used when someone said something foolish in front of him. This was a real smile. Light, brief, lasting only a few seconds. But it changed his entire face, softening the lines that power and vigilance had carved hard over so many years. Bellamy looked at that smile and remembered it. Not because she wanted to, because she couldn't help remembering, and because this was the first time she had seen it. Beckett's first smile with no calculation standing behind it. She continued changing the bandage. He sat still and let her work. For the first time, Beckett Aldridge allowed someone to touch the place where he was hurting without trying to handle it himself, and Bellamy knew that wasn't easy. For a man used to carrying everything alone, sitting still and letting someone care for him was probably harder than facing Knox. But he sat still, and she changed the bandage, and the small kitchen in the safe apartment in Midtown, at 11 o'clock at night, became the quietest place in Manhattan. The night before Beckett was to host the private party at the Gilded Room, he came to the safe apartment at 10 o'clock at night. No call beforehand. Bellamy heard the swipe of the keycard, looked up from the book she was reading, and knew at once that tonight was different from every other night, because Beckett carried no files, no phone in his hand, no face of a man drawing up a plan. He simply walked in, sat down in the chair across from her, and looked out the window. Bellamy set the book down, waited. The bruise on his left ribs had gone down, but she noticed he still leaned slightly to the right when he sat. The bandage had been removed from his left arm, leaving only a fading purple bruise. He looked like a man ready for the greatest fight of his life, and at the same time, like a man who wasn't sure he would win. "Tomorrow is the most important day since I took this seat," Beckett said, his voice low, his eyes fixed on the Manhattan darkness beyond the window. "If tomorrow doesn't go according to plan." He didn't finish the sentence, and Bellamy didn't let him finish it. "I remember everything you've ever said to me," she said. Her voice was gentle, but every word settled firmly, as if she were reading from a notebook only she could see, including something you said 3 weeks ago, at 1 o'clock in the morning, when you thought I was asleep. Beckett turned back to look at her. His eyes changed, no longer looking out the window, no longer looking into tomorrow's plan, looking at her, only her. "What did I say?" Bellamy looked at him, and she spoke, word for word, exactly, adding nothing, leaving nothing out, precisely the way he had said it 3 weeks earlier, when he had sat on this sofa at 1 o'clock in the morning, thinking she was asleep in the bedroom, his voice only a whisper to himself. "You said, 'She's the only reason I still want to wake up tomorrow morning without having to think about strategy.'" The room went silent. The clock on the kitchen wall ticked. The table lamp cast yellow shadows over both their faces. Outside, Manhattan roared on like every other night. But inside this apartment, nothing moved. Beckett looked at her. For a long time. Then he spoke, his voice softer than Bellamy had ever heard it. "I thought you were asleep." "I know. But I don't forget." Silence again. But this time it wasn't uncomfortable silence. It wasn't the silence of suspicion or caution. This was the silence of two people who knew exactly that they were standing at an edge, and both of them understood that one more step would change everything. Beckett leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees, looking down at his own hands. Then he looked up. "Are you afraid?" His voice was quiet, real, with no armor over it, knowing everything about me, even the darkest things, and still being here. Bellamy looked at him. The man sitting in front of her had given orders to hundreds of people. He had faced his own brother without flinching. He had walked into a dark alley alone to save her. And now, he sat there asking whether she was afraid, in the voice of someone who was afraid of the answer. "I remember even the darkest things," she said. "And I'm still here." "Isn't that the answer?" Beckett said nothing more. He stood, stepped closer to her, and before he walked to the door, his hand touched hers, lightly, only his fingertips, only for 1 second. Not holding, not keeping, just touching, as if he needed to make sure she was real, that this moment was real. Then he let go, walked away, opened the door, and left. The door closed. Bellamy sat alone. Her right hand rested on the arm of the sofa, exactly where his fingers had just touched. She remembered the precise pressure of his fingertips against the back of her hand. Light, warm, lasting exactly 1 second, no more, and she knew she would remember it forever. Not because her memory forced her to remember, but because for the first time, there was a memory she wanted to keep. Tomorrow, Beckett would gather every suspect into one room. Tomorrow, Bellamy would stand behind the bar, exactly where she belonged, and face the person who wanted her gone. Tomorrow could change everything, or break everything. But tonight, she remembered his fingers on her hand. And that was enough. The Gilded Room opened at 7 o'clock in the evening. But tonight, the bar wasn't receiving ordinary guests. Tonight was a private party, reserved only for those who had received an invitation from Beckett Aldridge. The public reason printed on the invitation was the celebration of the Aldridge organization's new transportation deal. The real reason was known by only two people, Beckett and Bellamy. Bellamy arrived at the bar at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. She wore a black shirt, a leather apron, her hair tied neatly back, the same bartender's appearance she had every night. She checked the liquor shelves, arranged the glasses, prepared the garnishes. Margot stood beside her, watching her work. "Are you sure?" Margot asked. "I'm sure." Margot didn't ask anything else. She didn't know the specific plan, but she knew enough to know tonight wasn't an ordinary night. 6:45. Beckett arrived. He wore a 3-piece black suit, his hair combed back, and he walked into the bar straight toward Bellamy, placing a small box on the counter. Inside was a wireless earpiece, as small as a pea, skin-colored. "Channel 2, he said quietly. "I hear everything you say. You hear everything I say." Bellamy put the earpiece into her left ear and covered it with her hair, almost invisible. She nodded. Beckett walked away and began checking the room. Security was already positioned at every exit. The front door, the back door, the emergency exit leading to the alley. No one came in or went out without being checked. And somewhere outside, within a 2-block radius, Detective Perry Walsh sat in a car with his team. Beckett had called him that afternoon. A short call. "Tonight, the Gilded Room. Something's going to happen. You should be nearby." Perry didn't ask much. He had been a cop long enough to know when he should listen. 7 o'clock. The guests began to arrive. Financial advisors, lawyers, business partners, familiar faces Bellamy had remembered from dozens of nights before. She mixed cocktails, poured liquor, smiled with the proper amount of restraint. Her hands worked. Her eyes read the room. 7:30. Knox Aldridge walked in. Gray suit, black tie, confident steps. He looked around the room, nodded in greeting to a few people, then went straight to the bar, sat down. Exactly where Beckett had arranged for him to sit. Exactly where Bellamy would serve him directly. Knox looked at her, She looked back. No fear, no challenge, only looking as if she were looking at any other guest. McAllen, 18, neat. His usual habit. Not the old-fashioned from the night Hugo Trent went down. Tonight, Knox ordered his familiar drink. Tonight, Knox was comfortable. Tonight, Knox thought he was safe. Bellamy nodded and turned back to the liquor shelf. She poured the McAllen slowly, slower than usual. Every second she stretched out was a second she used to observe the room through the mirror behind the bottles. Knox is sitting at the bar, she whispered, softly enough that only the earpiece could catch it. Ordered McAllen. Usual habit. Comfortable. In her ear, Beckett's voice answered, clipped. Good. Continue. 8 o'clock. 9 o'clock. The party went smoothly. Liquor flowed, laughter rose, glasses touched. Beckett moved through the room, shaking hands, talking, smiling, but his eyes never stayed away from Bellamy for too long, and Bellamy's eyes never left Knox for too long. 9:30. Bellamy prepared Knox's second McAllen. She set the glass on the counter and slid it toward him. Knox reached for it, his eyes on the room, not on her. And Bellamy spoke, lightly, casually, as if making polite conversation with a regular. A guest from Haverford sent his regards to you today. Haverford. One word. The name of a street Knox thought only people inside the organization knew. The street where the secret warehouse stood. Information the financial advisor had carelessly let slip inside the Gilded Room weeks earlier, right in front of Bellamy, when Knox had thought the bar was loud enough to swallow everything. Knox's hand stopped. The glass of McAllen hung halfway in the air. He looked at Bellamy. And she saw it happen across his face, layer by layer, quick but clear. Surprise, then understanding, then panic, then anger. You. Knox's voice was low, trembling slightly. What do you know? Bellamy didn't answer. She only looked at him, calmly, as if she were serving a guest who had ordered the wrong drink. And that was when Knox lost control. He stood up, the chair scraping backward across the floor. His right hand knocked the McAllen away, liquor splashing across the bar, the glass falling and shattering on the floor. He shoved over the table beside him. Bottles fell, glasses broke. The sound of breaking glass made the whole room turn. Then Knox reached inside his suit jacket, pulled something out, and aimed it straight at Bellamy. The entire room froze. No one moved. No one spoke. 30 people inside the Gilded Room stood as still as statues, their eyes fixed on Knox Aldridge and the thing he held in his hand, pointed at the bartender girl standing behind the bar. Bellamy didn't step back. She stood exactly where she had stood for so many nights, behind the bar, feet on the familiar wooden floor, hands on the familiar oak counter, where she belonged. She looked straight at Knox, and she didn't move. Her hands were shaking, but her eyes weren't. Then came footsteps, slow, even, from the other side of the room. Beckett Aldridge walked forward. He didn't run. Step by step, slowly, through the center of the room. People moved aside as he passed, automatically, without anyone needing to tell them, like water parting before the bow of a ship. His eyes were fixed on Knox. Only Knox, no one else. He passed 4 tables, 5 steps, 6 steps, 7 steps, and stopped, standing between Knox and Bellamy, his back turned toward her, shielding her with his own body. The room was so quiet that Bellamy could hear the wall clock behind the bar. Beckett looked at Knox. Knox looked at Beckett. 2 brothers, same father, same organization, and now standing face to face, one of them holding something aimed at the person the other loved. Beckett opened his mouth. His voice didn't rise at all. No shouting, no roaring, no threat. He only spoke, even, clear, and the whole room heard every word. You just raised that at someone who belongs to me. In front of the whole room. In front of the entire council. He stopped for 1 second. You're done, Knox. 3 seconds after Beckett spoke, security moved. Fast, clean, silent. 2 men from the back door. 1 from the corner of the room. They reached Knox before he had time to react. 1 man gripped Knox's wrist, twisted it lightly, and the object in his hand was taken away. The second man held his shoulder, forced him to turn, and guided him toward the door. No shouting, no throwing him down, no one falling. Only 3 men moving with the exact precision of something arranged in advance. Because it had been arranged in advance, Beckett had calculated this moment. He hadn't hoped Knox would lose control. He had known Knox would lose control, and he had prepared for it. Knox was led toward the front door. His hands were held behind his back, but he didn't struggle. The anger on his face had gone out, replaced by something colder, harder. When he passed Beckett, Knox stopped. Security allowed him to stop. Maybe because Beckett signaled it. Maybe because they knew the two brothers needed to look at each other one last time. Knox looked at Beckett. His voice was low even, not trembling. "You'll regret this." Beckett looked back. And Bellamy, standing behind the bar, saw Beckett's face in that moment. Not angry, not cold, only tired. Tired in the way of a man who had known this outcome for a long time and still hoped he was wrong. "I already regret it," Beckett said. "From the day I learned who you really were." Knox didn't answer. He turned his face away, and security led him out the door. Outside, Perry Walsh was already waiting. He entered the gilded room with 2 plainclothes officers and took Knox from Beckett's guards. The process was neat. No handcuffs in front of the crowd. No Miranda rights read in the middle of the party. Perry understood that tonight was an exchange, not a theater. Beckett handed Knox over. Perry accepted him. The evidence would come later. As Perry led Knox past the bar, he looked at Bellamy, only for 1 second, and nodded, briefly, without saying anything, but Bellamy understood. That nod said, "I know what you did, and I won't let it be wasted." Bellamy nodded back, just as briefly, just as silently. The front door closed behind Perry, Knox, and the 2 officers. Outside, an engine started, then faded into the distance. The party room was still crowded. 30 people stood motionless, glasses in hand, looking at Beckett. No one spoke. No one moved. They waited. Because in this world, when the boss stood in the middle of the room after taking down his underboss, no one spoke first. But Beckett didn't look at them. Not yet. He turned around, looked toward the bar, looked at Bellamy. She stood there. Exactly where she had stood all night. Exactly where she had stood when Knox pointed that thing at her. Her hands rested on the oak counter, and her hands were shaking, but she was still standing. Beckett looked at her across the room full of people, and she looked back. No words, no nod, no smile. Only looking. And in that moment, among the 30 most powerful people in Manhattan, between the shattered glass on the floor and the sharp scent of Macallan, still thick in the air, 2 people looked at each other, and both of them knew they had just passed through something not everyone could survive, and they had passed through it together. That moment lasted 3 seconds. Then Beckett turned back and faced the room. Margot rushed to Bellamy's side, her face pale. "You pushed Knox into that on purpose?" "Yes." "You said Haverford on purpose?" "Yes." "What if he hadn't stopped?" Bellamy looked at Margot, and she spoke, her voice calm, but there was something in her eyes Margot had never seen before. "Then at least I told the truth. I didn't stay silent like I did 13 years ago." Margot didn't ask what had happened 13 years ago. She knew, and she understood. Across the room, Beckett had begun. He ordered security to close the doors. No one out, no one in. He pulled out a chair and sat at the head of the longest table in the room. His white shirt still carried the Macallan stain from when Knox had knocked the glass over, but he didn't change. He sat there, in that liquor-stained shirt, and looked at each person one by one. "Knox wanted to take the organization back down the old road," Beckett said, his voice calm, even, never rising. "I don't." He stopped, looked around the table, every face, every pair of eyes. "Anyone in this room who agrees with Knox, this is the time to say so. I won't ask a second time, and I won't ask after tonight." Silence. Long. Heavy. No one opened their mouth. No one moved. No one dared look at the person beside them. "Starting tomorrow, we move forward." Beckett stood. The meeting was over. No applause, no handshakes, no one saying, "Agreed." Silence was the answer, and Beckett Aldridge, sitting at the head of the table, in a shirt stained with liquor, had just restored order to an entire organization, with only 3 sentences and 1 stretch of silence. A few days after that night, the gilded room opened again. The broken glass had been cleared away. The overturned table had been set back in place. The liquor stain on the floor had been wiped clean. The bar looked exactly as it had before, as if nothing had happened. But Bellamy knew that wasn't true. She remembered every crack in the floor, where the Macallan glass had shattered. She remembered the exact angle of the overturned table. She remembered the sharp smell of liquor in the air when Knox lost control. She would always remember, but she still stood behind the bar, mixing drinks, serving customers, because that was where she belonged. Thursday afternoon, before opening time, Bellamy was checking the liquor shelves when the doorbell rang. She looked through the glass. Perry Walsh stood outside, not wearing the wrinkled coat from the first time they met, but a pale blue shirt, empty-handed, with no case file, no notebook. He looked like a man who had come for a drink, not to take a statement. She opened the door. Perry stepped inside, looked around the empty bar, then sat down at the counter, right where a guest would sit, not where a cop would sit. "Bourbon?" Bellamy asked. "Bourbon." She poured Woodford Reserve and set the glass in front of him. Perry took a sip, slowly, then set the glass down, turned it on the counter, and looked into the amber liquid inside. "Knox Aldridge has been indicted," he said. "I didn't come to talk about that." Bellamy waited. Perry looked up. His eyes were different, not the eyes of a detective, the eyes of a man about to say something he had thought about for a long time before speaking. "Your mother's case." I reopened the file. Bellamy's hand stopped. She was holding a clean glass, about to set it on the shelf. Her hand froze halfway there. The glass hung in the air. "I'm not promising results," Perry said. "It's an old file, old evidence, and the witnesses may not still be around. I don't know where it will lead." He paused. "But this time, someone will listen." Bellamy set the glass on the shelf, slowly. She turned her back to Perry, facing the liquor shelves. Her hand picked up the cleaning towel and began wiping the bar top. A familiar motion, one she had done thousands of times. But her hand was shaking, just slightly, enough for the towel to drift a little away from its usual path. She didn't turn back. She didn't say thank you. She didn't say anything, because if she turned around right now, she wasn't sure she could keep her face normal. And Bellamy Cross wasn't someone who cried in front of other people. But her hand shook. And that was the first time in this entire story that Bellamy's hand shook, not from fear, not from anger, not from cold, but because she had heard the sentence she had waited 13 years to hear. "Someone will listen." Perry finished the bourbon, left money on the counter, stood, walked to the door. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't need to. The nod from that night at the Gilded Room had been enough, and now, her mother's file on his desk was the rest of it. The door closed. Bellamy stood alone. She set the towel down and looked at her hands, still shaking. She clenched them, opened them, clenched them again. Then she took a deep breath, picked up the towel, and kept wiping the bar, because that was what she knew how to do. And because now, for the first time, she wiped the bar with her chest, feeling a little lighter. Late that night, the Gilded Room was nearly closed. The final guest had gone home. Margot stayed behind, cleaning in the back. Bellamy was turning off the lights along the bar when the front door opened. She didn't need to look up to know who it was. Beckett sat down at the corner of the bar. The old place. Always that place. Bellamy poured Macallan 18. Neat. No ice. Set it in front of him before he opened his mouth. Exactly like the first night. Exactly like every night. Beckett looked at the glass, then looked at her. "You still remember everything?" "Still. Even the things I want you to forget, especially those." Beckett took a sip of the liquor, set the glass down. He was silent for a moment, as if searching for a way to say something he had never said to anyone. "Do you know what it feels like to sit in front of someone who remembers every word I've ever said? Scary?" "No." He looked at her, and Bellamy saw in his eyes something she had begun to recognize. Not the look of a boss, not the look of calculation, just Beckett. Light. Because for the first time, "I don't need to explain who I am. You already know." Bellamy looked at him, and she remembered every time he had sat in that place. The first time, back when the air outside was still crisp, 40 minutes of silence, $200 in tips. The time he warned her after closing. The time he stepped into the dark alley and said only, "Come." The time he sat silently at 3 o'clock in the morning. The time he placed his coat over her shoulders. The time he doubted her and then stayed. The time he let her change his bandage. The time his fingertips touched her hand for 1 second and then let go. She remembered all of it. Every moment. Every word. Every look. "I don't know where this will go," she said. "Neither do I. But I'll remember every step." Beckett looked at her. and she saw him smile. Not that first smile in the kitchen, brief and unexpected. This time it was slower, warmer, as if he were learning again how to smile without needing a strategic reason. He finished the Macallan, left money on the counter, stood, looked at her one last time before leaving. He didn't say goodbye, because they both knew he would come back. This place, this glass, this woman, the next morning. Sunlight, Brooklyn. Bellamy stood in front of Margot's door at 8 o'clock in the morning. She rang the bell. Small footsteps ran inside. Then the door flew open. Jonah rushed out and hugged her around the waist. 6 years old, messy-haired, wearing a t-shirt with a spaceship on it. The teddy bear with the worn ear was tucked under his arm. "Auntie, you were gone too long." Bellamy knelt down and hugged him, tightly, her face pressed into his hair, breathing in the scent of children's shampoo and ice cream from Margot's place. "I know, but I'm home now. Did you remember me?" "Every second." Jonah laughed, took Bellamy's hand, and pulled her into the house. Margot stood in the kitchen, coffee in hand, watching the aunt and nephew, smiling but saying nothing. She knew enough to know this. Bellamy had come home. And that was the most important thing. Bellamy sat down at Margot's kitchen table. Jonah climbed into her lap and began telling her stories about staying at Aunt Margot's. There had been 3 tubs of ice cream, not 2. There was a neighbor's cat that kept coming to the window. There was a new cartoon he had watched twice. Bellamy listened, nodded, smiled, and remembered every word the little boy said, because she remembered everything, and because these memories were ones she wanted to remember. A few weeks later, everything had settled. Knox was facing prosecution. The Aldridge organization operated under Beckett's command. Quieter now, cleaner now. The Gilded Room opened every night, and Bellamy stood behind the bar, mixing drinks, remembering everything, as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed, and the greatest proof of that was the message Bellamy sent Beckett one Saturday afternoon. "Come to my place for dinner tonight, 7 o'clock. I'm cooking." 6 words. But Beckett understood it wasn't simply a dinner invitation. It was Bellamy opening the final door she had kept most closely guarded, the door into the part of her life where Jonah lived. Beckett arrived at exactly 7 o'clock. He wore a dark blue shirt, no suit jacket, no tie. It was the first time Bellamy had ever seen him without a suit. He held a paper bag, and inside were a bottle of wine and a box of chocolate ice cream. "I didn't know what children like," he said as he handed the bag to Bellamy. "The clerk said chocolate ice cream is never wrong." Bellamy smiled. The clerk was right. The Brooklyn apartment was small, warm, filled with the smell of food from the kitchen. Jonah sat at the dining table, his legs swinging without touching the floor, the teddy bear with the worn ear sitting on the chair beside him. The little boy watched Beckett walk in, tilted his head, and looked him over from head to toe with the undisguised curiosity of a 6-year-old child. "Are you Aunt Bellamy's friend?" Beckett sat down across from Jonah, and Bellamy saw something she had never seen before. Beckett Aldridge, the man who could silence a room of 30 people with only a look, was sitting in front of a 6-year-old boy and didn't know what to do with his hands. He placed them on the table, then moved them to his lap, then placed them back on the table. Awkward, truly awkward. "Yes," he said, "I'm Aunt Bellamy's friend. What's your name?" "Beckett." Jonah looked at him seriously. "Do you remember things as well as Aunt Bellamy does?" "No. I forget a lot of things." Jonah tilted his head, thinking. Then he said, with complete honesty, "Then you're lucky. Aunt Bellamy says remembering too much is tiring." Beckett looked toward Bellamy. She was standing in the kitchen, her back turned, carrying a pot to the table, but her shoulders were trembling slightly, and Beckett wasn't sure whether she was laughing or crying. Maybe both. Dinner unfolded normally in a way Bellamy had never had before. Jonah talked about school, about the neighbor's cat, about the classmate who had 2 hamsters. Beckett listened, nodded, and asked questions from time to time. He wasn't good at talking to children, but he tried. And Jonah, with the instinct of a child, recognized that effort and accepted it. After dinner, Bellamy gave Jonah ice cream, helped him brush his teeth, and took him into the bedroom. When she came back out, Beckett was standing on the small balcony, looking down at the Brooklyn street at 9 o'clock at night. She stepped outside and stood beside him. "He's a good boy. He's the reason I do everything." "I know." Silence. A light wind. The sound of cars below. "You know I'm not a good man, don't you?" Bellamy looked at him. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking down at the street. But Bellamy knew he was waiting for her answer, and she knew this answer mattered more than any answer she had ever given. "I know you're trying to become a better one," she said, "and I remember every time you try. That's enough." Beckett turned to look at her, and then he did the thing both of them had been moving toward slowly, for so long, through each night, each conversation, each quiet moment. He took her hand, not a light touch of his fingertips like the night before the climax. He held it, her whole hand, his fingers threaded through hers, warm, steady, and he didn't let go. The two of them stood on the small balcony in Brooklyn, hand in hand, saying nothing more. And Bellamy thought this might be the most beautiful memory she would carry for the rest of her life. Not because it was perfect, but because it was real. The next morning, sunlight. Bellamy held Jonah's hand as they walked along a Manhattan sidewalk to school. The little boy hopped as he walked, avoiding the lines in the pavement, his backpack bouncing on his back. "Auntie, will Beckett come again?" "Maybe." "I like him," Jonah said, his voice natural, without much thought. The way children tell the truth because they haven't yet learned to say anything else. "He looks at you the way Dad looked at Mom in the old pictures." Bellamy stopped walking. She looked down at the 6-year-old boy holding her hand, the boy she had raised from the day her brother died, the boy she did everything to protect. And that little boy had just said the one sentence no one in Bellamy's entire 27 years of life had ever said to her. Not Beckett, not Margot, not Perry Walsh. Jonah, 6 years old, with eyes that saw everything adults were too busy to see. Bellamy knelt down until she was level with him. She hugged Jonah, tightly. "You saw that?" "I saw it. I remember." Bellamy smiled. Her eyes were wet. "Yes, everyone in our family remembers well." Jonah smiled back, took her hand, and pulled her to her feet. "Come on, Auntie, I'm going to be late for school." The aunt and nephew kept walking. Manhattan was loud around them. Cars, horns, voices, construction noise. But to Bellamy, that morning was quieter than every morning she had lived through in the past 13 years, because for the first time, she walked this sidewalk carrying not only painful memories, she carried warm ones too. Jonah's hand in hers, Beckett's hand in hers the night before, Perry's voice saying, "Someone will listen." Beckett's smile in the kitchen, and Jonah's sentence, the sentence she would remember forever, not because her memory forced her to remember, but because she wanted to remember. "He looks at you the way Dad looked at Mom." People often say you have to forget in order to keep living, but some people can't forget, and they still live, still love, still remain brave. Bellamy couldn't forget the pain, but she also couldn't forget kindness, truth, and the moments when someone looked at her as if she mattered. Sometimes, what heals you isn't forgetting. It's being remembered by someone, right when you thought you were invisible. And sometimes, the person who changes your life isn't the strongest or the richest one, but the only one brave enough to see you exactly as you are and still stay. If this story touched you, please hit like to support us in telling more stories like this. Share this video with a friend who needs to hear that courage is sometimes simply daring to remember the truth. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please subscribe now so you don't miss the next stories. How did this story make you feel? And which sentence made you pause the longest? Share it with us in the comments. We'd truly love to hear the feelings that come from deep within your heart. We wish everyone watching this video good health, a joyful life, and peace in every day. Goodbye, and we'll see you in the next video.